The 2009 Honduran constitutional crisis was a political dispute over plans to rewrite the Constitution of Honduras. It began when Honduran President Manuel Zelaya planned to hold a poll on a referendum on a constituent assembly to change the constitution. A majority of the government, including the Supreme Court and prominent members of his own party, saw such plans as unconstitutional, as they could lead to presidential re-election, which is permanently outlawed by the Honduran Constitution. The Honduran Supreme Court had upheld a lower court injunction against the 28th of June poll. However, the constitutional process for dealing with this situation was unclear. There were no clear procedures for removing or prosecuting a sitting president. The crisis culminated in the removal and exile of Honduran President Manuel Zelaya by the Honduran military in a coup d'etat. On the morning of the 28th of June 2009, approximately 100 soldiers stormed the president's residence in Tegucigalpa and flew him to San Jose, Costa Rica, actions which he immediately called a coup upon his arrival there. Later that day, the National Congress voted to remove Zelaya, having read without objection a letter of resignation that Zelaya says was forged. Roberto Micheletti, the President of Congress and next in the presidential line of succession, was sworn in as interim president. A state of exception, suspending civil liberties, was declared on the 1st of July by Micheletti's government and various curfews were imposed, some nationwide. On the 21st of September 2009, Zelaya returned in secret to Honduras, after several attempts to return had been rebuffed. It was announced that he was in the Brazilian embassy in Tegucigalpa. The following day, 5 constitutional rights were suspended for 45 days by the Honduras government. Specifically, the government suspended personal liberty, freedom of expression, freedom of movement, habeas corpus and freedom of association and assembly. The decree suspending human rights was officially revoked on the 19th of October 2009 in La Gaceta. International reaction to the 2009 Honduran crisis garnered widespread condemnation of the events as a coup d'etat. The United Nations, the Organization of American States, and the European Union condemned the removal of Zelaya as a military coup, and some of these condemnations may still remain unretracted. The OAS rejected an attempt by Honduras to withdraw from the organization and then suspended Honduras the next day. Domestic opinion remains very much divided, and there have been demonstrations for it against Zelaya. Efforts by Costa Rican President Oscar Arias and the United States to effect a diplomatic solution between Micheletti and Zelaya initially resulted in a proposal by President Arias calling for Zelaya's return to the presidency, albeit with curtailed powers. Arias's proposal also stipulated political amnesty and advanced the Honduran general elections by a month, pushing them to take place in October. In spite of U.S. support for the San Jose Accord, negotiations ultimately broke down as the two parties were unwilling to come to any lasting agreement. Zelaya also insisted that he would not recognize the elections of the 29th of November as a precondition to returning to power. Honduran leaders refused to reinstate Zelaya before the elections, and international support for the elections remained scant leading up to the polls. Many Hondurans sought to move past the crisis with the elections, which had been scheduled previous to Zelaya's ouster. While Zelaya had urged abstention from the vote, initial returns indicated a larger than usual turnout, around 60%, a figure which was subsequently revised downward to 49%. Zelaya also disputed those figures at the time. Some Honduran activists have ended daily protests demanding the reinstatement of Zelaya since he was ousted in a coup, saying they are moving on since Congress had voted to keep Manuel Zelaya out of office. The crisis drew to a close with the inauguration of the newly elected President Porfirio Lobo on the 27th of January 2010 and a deal to allow Zelaya to leave the Brazilian embassy into exile in the Dominican Republic. Background: political and socio-economic divide in Honduras. Two-thirds of Honduras citizens live below the poverty line, and unemployment is estimated at 28%. It has one of Latin America's most unequal distributions of wealth. The poorest 10% of the population receives just 1.2% of the country's wealth, while the richest 10% collect 42%. Approximately 20% of the nation's GDP comes from remittances of workers from abroad. The BBC described the huge wealth gap in a poor country as one of the reasons why the relations between the president and the other institutions were so strained, and that his leftward movement alarmed certain sectors. Zelaya pushed for a referendum, insisting that Honduras' grinding poverty stemmed from a constitution written in 1982 at the height of that country's brutal repression of leftists that rigs the game for the most powerful families and interests. Zelaya supporters, largely from labor unions and the poor, claim conservative business leaders are actually concerned because Zelaya had sharply increased the minimum wage. Victor Meza, formerly Zelaya's interior minister, stated that the impression that stuck with the traditional political class and with the most conservative business leaders of the country was that Zelaya had taken a dangerous turn to the left, and therefore that their interests were in jeopardy. Quote, "We underestimated the conservatism of the Honduran political class and the military leadership." Quote, according to John Donaghy of Caritas, the real conflict in Honduras is between the poor and wealthy. It's a system that has kept the poor down for years. To some members of Honduras's small upper class, Zelaya was ousted because of his blossoming leftist alliance with President Hugo Chavez of Venezuela, which they recognized as a threat to their interests. To the working class, it appears Zelaya was ousted because the elite felt threatened by his efforts to improve their lives, most notably with a 60% increase in the minimum wage to about $9.60 a day from about $6 a day. Some who protested in support of Zelaya had never voted for him. Zelaya presidency. Manuel Zelaya, a businessman born into a wealthy Honduran family, was elected in 2005 as the candidate of the country's historically powerful Liberal Party. Since taking office, Zelaya's economic and social policies earned him praise from labor unions and civil society groups, but alienated him from parts of his own party, which were particularly upset by Zelaya's forging a regional alliance with the Bolivarian Alternative for the Americas, established by Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez and other leaders in Latin America as a counter to the trade and security policies sponsored by the United States. Zelaya also planned to convert the Soto Cano Air Base, where one of the three United States Southern Command task forces is located, into a civilian airport, partly using financing from Ágora and Petrocaribe. The New York Times reported that much of Zelaya's support was derived from labor unions and the nation's poor, while the middle and upper class feared Zelaya was seeking to establish Hugo Chavez's type of socialist populism with a powerful leader in the country. Zelaya's government was accused of harassing journalists and also accused by the Organization of American States of imposing subtle censorship in Honduras. According to The Economist, Mr. Zelaya's presidency has been marked by a rise in crime, corruption scandals and economic populism. By April 2009, a Mitofsky opinion poll showed that, of those consulted, only 1 in 4 respondents approved of Zelaya, the lowest approval rating of 18 regional leaders. Alliance with Ágora. On the 22nd of July 2008, Zelaya revealed that he was seeking to incorporate the country into the Ágora, an organization founded by Hugo Chavez. In fact, he said that the country had been an observer member for more months. The Associated Press, citing Manuel Orozco of the Inter-American Dialogue, said that his campaign for changing the constitution has energized his support base of labor groups, farmers and civil organizations who have long felt marginalized in a country where a wealthy elite controls the media and much of politics. The Honduran right opposed the Ágora alliance, and were concerned that Zelaya would move to eliminate his term limit as he had other Ágora leaders, whom they considered would be dictators. According to National Party analyst Raul Pineda Alvarado, Zelaya's attempt to modify constitution was a carbon copy of what has happened in Venezuela, Ecuador and Nicaragua. U.S. Republican Newt Gingrich wrote in the Washington Examiner that Chavez had used Ágora to create a tide of incipient dictatorship flowing out of Venezuela into other countries in Latin America. He noted that Chavez had subverted democracy in Venezuela to ensure his rule will be uncontested for decades, and, one by one, each of the members of Ágora have followed Chavez's lead and changed the constitutions to remove limits on the number of terms the presidents can serve. However, the notion of extending term limits in Latin America is not unique to Ágora countries, as efforts in Colombia have been made towards allowing President Álvaro Uribe to seek re-election. Constitutional Assembly plans. As early as August 2006, Central America Report stated that liberal sectors were proposing to reform obsolete articles in the Constitution, including one against presidential re-election. The report said that this was causing controversy. Debate regarding the convening of a constituent assembly took place in Honduras, with support from many groups. The constitution has since 1980 been tweaked in other areas around 30 times, to the point where politicians of all camps are convinced that the document is no longer adequate. This is where the formal change proposed by Manuel Zelaya comes in, that in the November 2009 election round, the voters will be presented with 4 ballot boxes, the 4th one being used for a referendum on the question, do you agree with convening a constituent assembly to draw up a new constitution? On the 11th of November 2008, President Zelaya announced a non-binding referendum to see if the people wanted to have a 4th ballot box during the November 2009 election. The 4th ballot would ask voters whether they wanted to hold a national constituent assembly to draft a new constitution. Zelaya, whose presidential term was to expire on the 27th of January 2010, would be ineligible under the term limitations of the present constitution to run in the 2009 election. On the 22nd of December 2008, Zelaya issued 2 emergency executive agreements, both numbered 46A2008, which each authorized transfer of $30 million of public money to advertising of his 4th ballot box. Only one was published in the official Gazette. The supposed advertisers paid no sales tax. The Supreme Ordered Court's investigation of the advertising money raised concerns of irregularities. On the 17th of February 2009, at a public showcasing of tractor equipment received from Venezuela, Manuel Zelaya stated that he would propose a fourth ballot box. On the 24th of March 2009, Zelaya called for a preliminary poll to be held on the 28th of June 2009 to gauge popular support for including the Constituent Assembly question in the November 2009 election. Constitutionality of referendum. The President of the Congress, Michel-T, observed that Article 374 of the Constitution states that no referendum can be used to alter the entrenched articles in the Constitution that are specified in Article 384. He went on to insist that even to announce such a referendum privately is a crime. Article 373 of the Constitution of Honduras states that the Constitution can be modified by a two-thirds majority of the National Congress. Article 374, however, specifies that several articles are permanently entrenched, that is, they cannot be modified under any circumstances. The entrenched clauses include those on the system of government that is permitted, and a presidential succession. Article 239 specifically prohibits the president from attempting to amend restrictions on succession, and states that whoever does so will cease immediately in his or her functions. Zelaya's statement, "The only one who can't be re-elected is the president, but re-election is a topic of the next National Constitutional Assembly," is a declaration that some have argued violates Article 239. Article 239, however, is not mentioned at all in the judicial case file. The plan is officially ruled illegal. On the 25th of March, the Attorney General's office formally notified President Zelaya that he would face criminal charges of abusing power if he proceeded with the referendum. In late May, the Court of Contentious Administration ruled the poll illegal. Honduras Supreme Electoral Tribunal also ruled that such a poll would be illegal. The lower court's injunction against the poll was upheld by the Supreme Court. In late June, the intended consultative poll was also rejected by Congress. On the 3rd of June, Congress passed a resolution warning Zelaya to correct his administrative conduct. On the 11th of June, the Bar Association of Honduras unanimously agreed that Zelaya was violating the law. It asked Zelaya to stop the illegalities and recommended officials not follow his illegal orders. On the 23rd of June 2009, Congress passed a law forbidding holding official polls or referenda less than 180 days before the next general election, which would have made the 28th of June poll illegal. Since this bill was passed after the poll was scheduled, Zelaya rejected its applicability to this case. The military is in charge of security and logistics in elections in Honduras. Zelaya asked them to perform their election role for the poll, but the head of the military command, General Romeo Vasquez Velasquez, refused the order to pass out the poll materials because the Supreme Court had ruled the poll to be illegal. On the 24th of June, Zelaya fired him. Later that day, the defense minister and heads of the Army, Navy and Air Force resigned. On the 25th of June, the Supreme Court ruled 5-0 that General Velasquez be reinstated. Tribunal member David Matamoros affirmed the Electoral Tribunal's support for the military's actions. On the 24th of June, surveillance cameras captured how about $2 million in cash was withdrawn from the Central Bank of Honduras and allegedly driven to the office of Enrique Flores Lanza, Zelaya's chief of staff. The suspicious money was possibly used to finance the referendum. Just days before the referendum, Zelaya published Executive Decree PCM 019-2009, which revoked the earlier Decree PCM 05-2009. Zelaya issued a new executive decree PCM 020-2009, another attempt to legalize the referendum. According to a legal analysis by former Supreme Court President Vilma Morales, Zelaya stopped being president of Honduras. Ballots seized. Ballots arrived from Venezuela on a plane and the ballot boxes were kept at the Tegucigalpa airport. The Supreme Electoral Tribunal ordered the illegal ballots to be confiscated. Investigators from the Ministerio Público and the Honduran Attorney General's office arrived at the airport. Zelaya led several hundred people to an Air Force base and took possession of the disputed poll ballots, which were then kept in the presidential palace to avoid the destruction. In late June, there were large marches both for and against the proposed fourth ballot box. The Supreme Court, Congress, and the military and the National Human Rights Commissioner recommended that voters stay home because the poll would be neither fair nor safe for voters. Coup d'etat. Supreme Court detention order. On the 27th of May 2009, the Administrative Law Tribunal issued an injunction against holding the poll at the request of the Honduran Attorney General Luis Alberto Rubi. On the 16th of June, the Court of Appeals unanimously upheld the 27th of May injunction. On the 18th of June, the Administrative Law Tribunal ordered Zelaya to comply with the ruling in writing within 5 days. On the 26th of June, the Supreme Court unanimously found that the presidency had not complied with the 18th of June court order. It also found he was answerable to charges brought by the Attorney General for the crimes against the form of government, treason to the motherland, abuse of office and usurpation of functions that damaged the administration. To initiate the case, the Supreme Court appointed member Tomás Arita Vale, who, on the 26th of June, issued a sealed order to detain Zelaya for the purposes of taking a statement. Some pro-Zelaya supporters have sought to cast doubt on the Supreme Court's documentation. Zelaya's detention and first exile. Soldiers stormed the president's residence in Tegucigalpa early in the morning of the 28th of June, disarming the presidential guard, waking Zelaya and putting him on a plane to Costa Rica. In San Jose, Costa Rica, Zelaya told Telesur that he had been awakened by gunshots. Masked soldiers took his cell phone, shoved him into a van and took him to an Air Force base, where he was put on a plane. He said he did not know that he was being taken to Costa Rica until he landed at the airport in San Jose. To the media, he described the events as a coup and a kidnapping. Tanks patrolled the streets and military planes flew overhead. Soldiers guarded the main government buildings. The government television station and a television station that supported the president were taken off the air. Television and radio stations broadcast no news. The electrical power, phone lines, and international cable TV were cut or blocked throughout Honduras. Public transportation was suspended. Later that day, the Supreme Court issued a statement that it had ordered the army to arrest Zelaya. On the 30th of June, the military's chief lawyer, Colonel Herbeth Inestrosa, showed Judge Arita's arrest order. Colonel Inestrosa later stated that deporting Zelaya did not comply with the court order, but that military leadership had decided to avoid violence in Honduras, asking what was more beneficial: remove this gentleman from Honduras or present him to prosecutors and have a mob assault and burn and destroy and for us to have to shoot. Inestrosa also stated that Zelaya's allegiance to Chavez was hard to stomach and it would be difficult for us, with our training, to have a relationship with a leftist government. That's impossible. I personally would have retired, because my thinking, my principles, would not have allowed me to participate in that. Ramon Custodio, the head of the country's Human Rights Commission, said that Zelaya's exile was a mistake and that the military made an error sending Zelaya into exile rather than holding him for trial. Honduras's Supreme Court has agreed to hear a case brought by a group of lawyers and judges arguing that the military broke the law taking Zelaya out of the country. In August 2009, Micheletti himself said that a mistake was made when Zelaya was exiled. Alleged impeachment and presidential succession. A document purporting to be a resignation letter written by President Zelaya, dated the 25th of June, was read to Congress. Zelaya has said he did not write the letter. Later that day, in an extraordinary session, Congress voted to remove Zelaya for manifest irregular conduct and putting in present danger the state of law. The President of the National Congress was the next on the presidential line of succession because Vice President had earlier quit to run in the 2009 elections. The President of the National Congress was Roberto Micheletti, a member of Zelaya's party. By a show of hands, the National Congress, the majority of whom belonged to Zelaya's own Liberal Party, named Micheletti to complete the remaining months of the presidential term. At around 12:37 the Honduran National Congress unanimously agreed to, under the Articles 1, 2, 3, 4, 205, 220, subsections 20, 218, 242, 321, 322, 323 of the Constitution of the Republic, disapprove Zelaya's repeated violations of the Constitution, laws and court orders. Remove Zelaya from office. Name the current President of Congress to complete the presidential term that ends on the 27th of January 2010. Honduran institutions, including the National Congress, the Supreme Court, and the interim government, maintain Zelaya was replaced constitutionally. Arguments that Zelaya's ouster was illegal because the proper legal procedures were not used has been advanced by several lawyers. Acting Honduran President Roberto Micheletti said forcing deposed President Manuel Zelaya to leave the country, instead of arresting him, was a mistake. Emergency measures by the interim government. Acting President Roberto Micheletti ordered a curfew which initially lasted for the 48 hours from Sunday night until Tuesday. The curfew law was not published in the official journal Ágora and was not approved by Congress. Originally the curfew ran from 9 o'clock p.m. to 6 o'clock a.m. That curfew was extended, changed, or renewed several times, in ways Amnesty International and the International Observation Mission called arbitrary. On the 1st of July, Congress issued an order which extended restrictions between 2200 and 5 o'clock local time and also suspended 4 constitutional guarantees, including freedom of transit, due process, and freedom from unwarranted search and seizure. The ambassadors of Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua stated that on the 29th of June that they were detained and beaten by Honduran troops before being released. Also, several allies of Zelaya were taken into custody by the military. Among them were Foreign Minister Patricia Rodas, the mayor of the city San Pedro Sula, Rodolfo Padilla Sunseri, several congressmen of the Democratic Unification Party, and several other government officials. A dozen former ministers from the Zelaya government, as well as presidential candidate Cesar Ham, went into hiding. A Venezuelan state-owned media outlet claimed that Tomás Andino Mencias, a member of the party, said that PUD lawmakers were led away by the military when they tried to enter the parliament building for the 28th of June vote on Zelaya's deposal. Several TV stations, radio stations, and newspapers' websites were temporarily shut down. The Miami Herald reported that the crackdown on the media began before dawn on the 28th. It said that only pro-Micheletti stations were allowed to broadcast and that they carried only news friendly to the new government. Associated Press personnel were detained and removed from their hotel, but later released. A number of local reporters and media sources reported on harassment and restrictions. Alejandro Villatoro, director of Radio Globo, said that he was arrested and kidnapped for some hours by the military. Honduran newspaper La Prensa reported on the 30th of June that an armed group of Zelaya supporters attacked its main headquarters by throwing stones and other objects at the windows, until police intervened.